So, I mean, we've met in person and yeah, exactly. Oh, I remember I was so lucky to get to meet you in person in January 2020. And, I feel like this book would have been incredibly different if we did not have that. And then we saw each other briefly in New York after that. So it's wonderful to be here. And my first question to these amazing women is I wanted to ask them to tell us a little bit more about themselves and the work that they do and why they have devoted their lives to this work. So I guess we'll just go in order.
Just gonna the whole time, or am I gonna go first?
I'll switch it up.
Sure. Wanted is such an honor to be here tonight in person, not on Instagram Live or on Zoom. It's just great to see everyone's faces. My name is Allegra Massaro, and I am a co-founder and co-executive director of Fuel the People, which is a Washington, D.C. and New York City based grassroots organization that partners with Black and POC chefs and restaurants to feed protesters on the front lines. So that's how we got started. And then in addition to that work, we've also expanded and we feed food and housing insecure folks throughout our communities, voters in long lines in marginalized neighborhoods, and really just anyone that's within our community. We started Fuel the People days after the murder of George Floyd. And my oldest brother, or not my oldest brother is there. My other brother, Lorenzo, and I were at the protests that were in front of the White House on, I think it was May 29th. And we were running away from tear gas and got tear gassed by the police. And we were just, looking for the person who had the combination of baking soda and water to ease the tear gas from our eyes. And we came home and we were all just sitting there with a group of friends and at my dinner table, and we're trying to say that we could be in the movement in a different way, because I was involved in organizing in college and throughout Philadelphia. And at the dinner table, which is where we oftentimes convene, we decided to make sandwiches for protesters. So we started making homemade sandwiches like in an assembly line at home. A good friend of mine was doing the same with her friends in New York, and we got together to make Fuel the People. And within our first, I think 72 hours, we raised $25,000. And we said, okay, we can't make $25,000 worth of sandwiches. So that's when we really realized that we had an incredible opportunity, especially at that point when restaurants had been closed for months during the pandemic, to connect communities, to connect local businesses, and especially local like Black chefs and restaurateurs to the front lines, and to pay them to make meals that we would then take to protest. So that is how I got started with the work that I'm doing with Fuel the People, and sort of how my work as an activist has changed over the past decade.
Uh-oh, there's going to be a lot of clapping tonight.
Oh,
because y'all deserve it all the time.
absolutely. Allegra, that was such a powerful story. And I love the fact that you can recall the date, the moment that it happened. That's so important. And so my name is Devita Davison, and I am the executive director and co-founder of an organization called FoodLab Detroit. And we also have a sister organization called FoodLab Chicago. And the date that FoodLab started is important. And so FoodLab started as a meetup group in 2011. And it sits at the intersection of two very important moments in time. In 2008, the United States of America saw Wall Street crash. There was a financial tsunami. The mortgage industry failed. Folks say when New York sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. Well, my hometown, Detroit, caught pneumonia. And in the process, more than 40% of Black folks lost their wealth. Why? Because Black people in Detroit, their wealth was tied up in their home. That happened in 2008. 2013, 2 years after FoodLab started, the city of Detroit announced that it was going to file for the largest municipal bankruptcy than the United States of America had ever seen from a major city. 2008, FoodLab started in 2011 as a meetup group. Detroit filed for bankruptcy in 2013. Here's what Detroiters knew. We knew that the federal government nor the local municipality was going to save us. If we were going to rebuild our community and provide healthy, fresh, affordable, culturally appropriate food to our neighborhoods, we were going to have to do it ourselves. Because all the major grocery stores had left. Here it is, a city of almost 700,000 people, and there wasn't one regional, national, or major grocery store to be found. And so if we were going to feed our children, we started to ask ourselves the question that Fannie Lou Hamer asked in 1967 when she founded the Freedom Farm Collaborative. How are we going to feed our people? So I asked myself that question. And the question came to me that Detroiters were doing what Detroiters always do. We were surviving. We were already frying turkeys in garages. We were already commandeering church kitchens, catering events. We were already making birthday cakes and macaroni and cheese and dressing for sale out of our kitchens. We were doing it in what was called an informal economy. And so the only thing I had to do was to create a platform, create a system, create a structure that allowed Detroiters to move out of what was called the informal economy into the formal economy by providing them the tools, the resources, and the community and the access to allow them to grow and scale businesses. That was in 2013. Fast forward 2021, one of our founding FoodLab members will have $1 million year this year. A Black woman by the name of April Anderson. And a lot of our FoodLab members have gone on to start and scale businesses, gotten accolades from the James Beard Foundation. But it started because in Detroit, we had a mentality, for us, by us. And we can do it. And FoodLab just happened to be a conduit to make that happen.
That's for last. Thank you so much for having us this evening. This is really a lovely occasion for me, and it is really brilliant for me to be here with these young women who represent the outgrowth of the work that I started doing in 1966. You can imagine that's a very long time ago. I think the idea of living as a member of the Black Panther Party and still being alive is in itself a great occasion just to be here and to have experienced all of the things that I experienced, including living in all of the places that you I was born and raised in Philadelphia. I worked in Washington, D.C. And of course, you know, I spent 5 years working on the line as an auto worker in the city of Detroit at Dodge Truck. So this is a pretty amazing for me to have this experience. I want to begin by talking about why it is that food is so connected to everything that we do. And I also want to say that I began my interest in food when I was a very tiny girl, because I had this amazing grandmothers, 2 amazing grandmothers, both of which were into food and both of which insisted that I learn all about food and all about how to do it. So in fact, by the time I got to be a Black Panther and be involved in the expression of struggle through the use of food, by first being part of the free breakfast program. And the free breakfast program itself was an expression of this recognition that we needed to have every parent in the Black community, every individual in communities of colors need food. And we need food because food is life. And because nutrition is what keeps us going, what keeps us interacting with each other, keeps us alive. So we knew that part of it. And our relationship to many of the young doctors and the new residents that came into the South Bronx community, when they explained to us the importance of nutrition and how it worked in terms of health, and we knew that we had to take that on, but we also knew it because Bobby Seale and Huey Newton over there in 1966, over there in Oakland, had told us that we needed to initiate a program that exposed the government, who kept saying that they didn't have enough money to pay for food for our children. And we knew that there was enough resources throughout this country to make it absolutely make food into an absolutely free and accessible commodity resource. And that's what we wanted to do. So that's the beginning of the free breakfast program. We wanted our children to be able to eat food. And I want to tell you the story of how the free breakfast program, how we worked in the free breakfast program. And I just wanted to begin by saying we got up at 5 o'clock in the morning to feed the children in our community. And then we also went around to the people in the community that owned stores and bodegas and everything else in the community and asked them to commit to making a contribution back to the community that was making sure that they lived. And they did, and we did. And the churches in the community offered their spaces for us to cook in, for us to go and pick up those kids, bring them to the free breakfast program, cook their food, bring them to the free breakfast program, and then take them to school after we taught them about some interesting things about their own history. So again, this is such a wonderful experience to be here and to hear the outgrowth of that program.
I know it really struck me when we were first meeting the other day, how we have all these different decades of experience represented. And I think that's so profound because you're getting this real sense of the story of the evolution, and not that it's gotten better, it's just continued to change and build upon each other. But we'll get to that question in a little bit. So we're talking a lot, obviously not just about how we are feeding people and how necessary it is for people to have nutrition, for people to be well fed. But I want to ask you all to speak a little bit more using a phrase that came up in our conversation the other day about food to provide agency, sovereignty, and or identity. And so it's really maybe just speaking a little more deeply about your work, thinking about those three concepts. And let's start with Cleo.
Agency, sovereignty. Well, one of the interesting things one of the interesting things that I also did is that I worked for this nonprofit called Community Food Resource Center. And my job here in New York City was to go around and establish community food committees made up of parents who are interested in making sure that their children got the proper food to eat. Because this is way past, this is in the 90s, so this is way past the free breakfast program. And what had happened was the people who were running the school food programs, the school breakfast programs and lunch programs were throwing food into the microwaves and handing it to kids. And the parents were like, no, we're not having it. We want our children to have hot cereal for breakfast. We want them to have rice and beans for lunch. We want them to learn about collard greens and to eat them for their lunch. And there were so many other things that the parents wanted. So when you talk about agency, what happened was the parents wanted to meet with this guy named Kevin, I believe it was O'Neill, who said that he fed more children in New York City than the Army fed, but the food was terrible. So the parents wrote him a letter with my assistance and asked him for a meeting. So instead of offering the parents a date for the meeting, he wanted to know who this Cleo Silver was, and he wanted her head on a silver platter. So in fact, the parents did finally get a meeting with Mr. O'Neill. And the first thing he asked the parents was, who is this Cleo Silver? I was in the room. And every parent raised their hand and said, I'm Cleo Silvers. What a beautiful response.
That makes me think about your work too with Bronx Parents United. United Bronx Parents. And that's what I was thinking too about how these parents, they feel like they are an authority on what is healthful food, what is culturally appropriate, what their children should be eating. They may not feel like they're an authority, particularly if they're immigrants or maybe don't have a high level of education on the curriculum, but they felt like they were an authority on how to make their kids healthy. And so that was their conduit to being engaged in education and their children's education. I love that story. Great. Davita?
Yeah, I'll go next. Agency, identity, and sovereignty. Powerful words. Let me tackle identity. And so I describe myself and I identify as a Detroiter. But peeling back the onion layers a bit, I identify even more so as a first generation Detroiter, because I was the first person in my family that was born outside of the rural South. I mention that because my mother and father left rural Alabama. Mommy left Selma, daddy left Birmingham, fleeing Jim Crow, fleeing state-sanctioned violence. We know about refugees, don't we? We're seeing it on TV every day. The United States of America had its own refugees. 7 million African Americans for the first time made a decision on their own, stepped outside of the South to make a better way for their family, their children themselves. My mother and father was a part of what was called the Great Migration. They left the South, headed to Detroit, making a way for themselves and their unborn children, coming to a land that they did not know. And when you go to a place that you did not know, whether it was Africa, and I'm remembering the stories that they tell that Black women were braiding seeds in their hair, making the transatlantic trip because they wanted to make sure that when they got to the new land, that they would still have the seeds from Africa to remind them of home. But in my mother and father's case, and many Black folks' case, when we talk about food and identity, even though they came up north, they would bring the food from the South to the north. So much so that that migration from the north to the South brought with it soul food restaurants in places like Detroit, Chicago, and Cleveland, and Philadelphia. People call it soul food, but what it really is migration food. It was the food that Black folks bought from the rural South to the north. So food is a part of my identity because I identify with food because it speaks to the migratory pattern that my parents took from the north into the South. Now that's going one way. My mother and father lived in Detroit, made a home in Detroit since 1962, but I went back down to red dirt, Alabama every year of my life. I'm turning 53 this year, every year of my life until I was 18. Some folks went to camp. I went to go visit grandma and granddaddy down in Alabama. Mom and daddy dropped us off and picked us up when school was going to start. The reason why I say that is I'm talking about the late 60s, early 70s. I know y'all don't know what I'm talking about, but there was a time when Black folks just couldn't stop anywhere they wanted to along the way. We had something what was called the Green Book. It was a book that Black folks used, that we knew where we could stop to eat, where we could stop and stay, where it was safe. And there was also something that my mother and father prepared, and it was called shoebox lunches. Mommy would fry chicken and make potato salad and tuna salad and white bread and casserole. Because when we got hungry on the road as Daddy was driving, we knew we couldn't stop just anywhere, my God. And so that was the migration going back to Alabama. And so food is so much a part of the identity of Black America, because it tells me how we survived and still surviving. And I'm so glad and so proud that I also sit on the James Beard Foundation for Restaurants and Awards Committee. And we were able this year to give 6 awards for what we call James Beard Classics. 3 out of the 6 were African-American owned restaurants. Miss Corrine in Camden, New Jersey was an awardee. The owners of Busy Bee in Atlanta, Georgia, soul food restaurant, Miss Smith, was an awardee. And Miss Florence in Oklahoma was an awardee. And if you count up all the years of those 3 women in business, 173 years. Cultural identity wrapped up in food in those restaurants. Also on the list for hospitality is Miss Woods, so poor that she had never walked into a restaurant until she came to Harlem and walked into a restaurant for the very first time, became a server at that, ended up owning the cultural legacy, the institution that we all know and love called Sylvia's. That's the power of food and identity. It reminds me of who I am, from who I came from, a people who grew the food, harvested the food, processed the food, my God, who gave us scraps, the guts, the intestines of pigs, and we turned it into chitlins. My God, would throw away food and we made it into a delicacy. That's who I am. And so that's my identity, sovereignty. I do the work because I am piggybacking off of Black urban growers who migrated from the South to the North in Detroit. Over, I would say in the city of Detroit now, we have over 1,900 farms and gardens in the city of Detroit. During harvest time, over 40,000 Detroiters are engaged in growing, harvesting, processing food. So when we talk about sovereignty and agency, the reason why we do that, not only to supplement our grocery bills, that's important for poor folks to be able to have power over our food. But we also do it because we want to own the food that we put on our babies' plates and in our mouths. We want to grow it. We want to be in control of it. And then this part about agency, I think that Dr. Monica White wrote a beautiful book about Black farming. And I love that when we have agency and control over our own stories, we can rewrite those stories. We can take something that was brutal, something that was violent, like slavery. So many young people say, oh, I don't want to get on the farm because that reminds me of slavery and I'm not a slave. But women and men are now writing stories that putting your hands in the dirt, young people, it does not have to signify trauma. It can also signify healing. It can also signify power. It can also signify something. So we can flip that narrative on its head and take something that was once attributed to labor and free labor and violence, and we can turn it into something that is beautiful and enriching in our community. So that's what those 3 things mean to me.
These women.
I think when I think about food as sovereignty, identity, agency, I also think about food as dignity. And there's a quote that I think for me really informs food as all of those pillars, and it's by our queen, Miss Leah Chase. And she said, food builds big bridges. When you can eat with someone, you can learn from someone. And when you can learn from someone, you can make big changes. And for me, you know, growing up, I am a Black woman and I'm biracial. My mom's family is from South Carolina and Savannah, Georgia, and my dad's family is Italian. So food for me was always a way that we came together and stood firm in our identity. We didn't fuse things together, but we showed up exactly as we were on both sides of the family. And when I think about food as agency in the work that we do with Fuel the People, you know, we work with chefs that make butter poached mashed potato lobster bowls, and we take those to the front lines. We work with chefs that make, you know, jerk chicken and jollof rice, and we take that to the front lines. And we're not just taking, you know, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, which is wonderful because people give what. We're making sure that when we show up, we're showing up with options, and we give people a choice to choose what they wish to eat. And really intentional about the fact that we are not the only ones who deserve the right to be able to eat in a restaurant. So we take the restaurant and we take it to the front lines, and we take it to our communities, and we make sure that in the neighborhoods that we go to, people have the option, and we recreate that experience. And I think that, you know, as someone who loves to eat, my Sunday ritual is going to Trader Joe's and going into the kitchen and connecting with my ancestors. I never use recipes. I just say, I'm going to add a dash of this and a dash of that until my ancestors tell me to stop. And it is such a privilege to be able to do that. And everybody deserves that. And that's what I mean when I say delivering food with dignity. So that's how I think about those pillars when it comes to food.
So much. So one concept that I talk about a fair bit in my book is this idea of activist mothering. And this comes from the scholar Francois Hamlin from Brown University. And it's been interesting talking to so many different people and talking to Cleo in different ways about this concept of using feminized labor, what we typically think of as being women's work, and the ways that this really shows leadership. These are such specified skills. These are such important skills that have for so long been unsung, overlooked, just expected of women. But I definitely, believe, as Dr. Hamlin does, that we need to reclaim this, and we need to see them as being so integral to leadership, to formal leadership, to informal leadership. So I'd love to ask all of you how you see yourself perhaps as an activist mother, or maybe you've been inspired by an activist mother, and it doesn't have to be someone who is a parent. It could be anyone using these skills. And this also speaks to the idea of intergenerational activism and how younger generations have learned from older generations, have learned from activist mothers, or how perhaps one of you have been a mentor to others. I'm not sure who should speak. Oh, excellent. Allegra will speak first.
I do not think of myself as an activist mother. I would say I think of myself as an activist sister. And I think being on the front lines, especially over the past 2 years, so much of what I have found is sisterhood. And so much of the power of today's movement, and also yesterday's movement and tomorrow's movement, is because of the power of sisterhood. And, Suzanne, I read through the digital copy of the book that you sent us, and something that I never thought about that you mentioned in your book is you talk about how, in the 50s and 60s, for Black women to open up restaurants was actually an accessible way for them to start a business, because it was something that people thought was acceptable. This makes sense, like Black women in the kitchen, Black women giving, Black women cooking food, and how it was one of the more accessible ways of entrepreneurship.
Became their agency.
Yes, exactly. And what did they do with that agency? They fed our civil rights leaders. I think about Georgia Gilmore and the Club from Nowhere. I think about Leah Chase and Dookie Chases. And I think about restaurants that we even work with now today in DC. One of our partners is Ben's Chili Bowl, which was opened in 1957. And 2 years ago, they partnered with us to feed protesters at the March on Washington. They fed protesters at the original March in 1963, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and there were protests all throughout cities, and the cities closed. Ben's Chili Bowl stayed open, and Stokely Carmichael asked them to stay open so that they could feed people.
And the matriarch of that restaurant, Miss Virginia Ali, is still alive and still with us today and still feeding people. So I think, as you just said, when Black women have power, like what do we do with that agency? And I think that, you know, we stand on the shoulders of giants, and there are so many Black women that are unsung for the work that they did. And I think about even our mothers and what they did and what they sacrificed to make sure that we had food on the table. And part of what I love about MOFAD and part of what I love about this exhibit
is look at that quilt. Look at all of the faces of Black women that you see. And there is not a single Black male chef that does not credit his mother or his grandmother for the recipes that he makes. But when you think about food and you think about Black food, so often it's Black men that are the gatekeepers of it. And like, if you actually take a minute, close your eyes and think about when you think about Black food and conversations that are happening today, and like this new restaurant that started by a Black chef and this program on TV, a lot of it is led by Black men. And they are the, you know, realized dreams of the women that they learn from. And so I'm just so grateful for one, this panel and, you know, Black women up here, but also this exhibit, because I think it shows you the power of Black women, and it shows you that, you know, we've been doing this for decades. Nothing that we're doing here is new, and we stand on the shoulders of giants. Women like Miss Cleo, you know, for Fuel the People, we talk all the time about the Black Panther free breakfast program. So to be sitting up with you here today is such an honor and such a legacy. And yeah, nothing that we're doing here is new. We just truly stand on the shoulders of giants and unsung Black women who are truly our heroes. And I'm just so glad to see them being recognized on this panel and also up on this quilt and in this exhibit.
You know, Allegra really said it all. She really did. You know, the thing that I think that I want to add, I don't see myself as a mother activist. Is that
An activist mother.
activist mother? No, I see myself more as a strategist. And being an activist requires strategy for sure. And the reason why I say that, the strategy, and I just want to pull a thread from Allegra, and that is when she talked about Georgia Gilmore and the club from nowhere, and how she used the power of selling fish dinners, chicken sandwiches, to actually fund the civil rights movement. Not by herself, her and a whole league of unsung women. And when I think about the civil rights movement, again, pulling a thread that Allegra started, many times when we think about the civil rights movement, we always think about this one iconic cisgendered Black man. And there are a lot of unsung Black women that fueled the movement. And what I'll say about that, and why I consider myself a strategist, and food is just a conduit in that which I play strategy out, is if you all think for one moment that Black women were not behind the Montgomery boycott that gave us Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I advise for you all to go back and read your history. And I say that because, my God, if we could have reframed that civil rights movement, particularly the Montgomery boycott, it all started when Rosa Parks went to go sit with Reese Taylor, when she took down her testimony of how she was violently raped by white men. Rosa Parks was the secretary for the NAACP. And when the NAACP started to document the violence that was inflicted upon Black women's bodies, they sent Rosa Parks to do the documentation. And so not only did she document the violent and brutal rape of Reese Taylor, she began to document the sexual violence that was inflicted upon Black women who were riding what? The bus. We were the ones that were on the bus, having to get on the bus, go where? Across the bridge or on the other side of town so we could go to work. We were the ones that were being violently, sexually harassed by white male bus drivers, talked to any old kind of way, felt up anytime they wanted to feel it and touch our bodies. Could you imagine if the civil rights movement and the Montgomery boycott was reframed as a movement to protect Black women's bodies? My God. Why do you think Black women were so intricately involved in the Montgomery boycott? Who do you think was commandeering the rides back and forth? Who do you think that was orchestrating strategy on how to do fundraising? Who do you think was organizing the meetings in the church basements? Who do you think was taking notes? Black women, because we were protecting ourselves, our bodies, our dignities. This was a fight of the respect for ourselves. But we knew what nobody listened to us. And so the Montgomery Community Board Association chose a young preacher. Chose a young preacher to be their president. That preacher, of course, we know is Martin Luther King Jr. And it was Black women who educated him and cultivated him and put him out front. And so Black women are strategists. And for many of us, food is a conduit to orchestrate that strategy. Because when Black women lead, we don't just think about ourselves, we bring the whole community with us. We bring our families, we bring our children, we bring our men, we bring everybody. And so I do the work that Black women have been doing for years, and that is using food as a strategy to catalyze community for change. That's it.
I guess I'm next. And the question was, do I recognize myself as an activist mother? And as a matter of fact, I have to say, of course I do. Of course, the struggle in which I was engaged over this last 55 or 60 years was a struggle that included some bad sisters, okay? Some bad activist mothers. And I just wanna just call some names for you that you might recognize. Afeni Shakur, the mother of Tupac Shakur, was my comrade, my sister, and one of the baddest organizers you have ever met in your life. And one of the greatest cooks you have ever met in your life. And there's so many other sisters. I got a sister named Pam Hanna. And Pam Hanna is a young revolutionary compared to me. I'm telling you all that 75 is the new 50. And Pam was a teenager when she came into the Black Panther Party. Pam Hanna is a great cook. Pam Hanna is an activist. She's one of these sisters that goes up to visit the political prisoners. And I do want to remind you that in this country, we still have almost more than 50 members of the Black Panther Party who have been incarcerated for their views, and not because they are criminals. And I don't want to lose that point. I don't want to lose that fact in this discussion, because yes, we women were the ones who were on the bus to go and cook food. So I want to pull that string too. We were going from our homes to the homes of the white women in the South to cook food for their children and their families. And I didn't want to miss that before I go on and talk about some of the great sisters. Sister Oda Fonda is another great revolutionary sister from the Black Panther Party. I want to talk about Sister Ife, Sister Kathleen Cleaver, my comrade, my friend, who I love dearly. These are some women who you must know were some of the toughest women you have ever met, who did everything that the brothers did in the Black Panther Party. We sold the most newspapers. We strategized about the struggle. We knew how to handle whatever defensive equipment that was necessary to know how to handle. And we cooked food for all of the party. And we took care of the children. And how we did it is we organized. We organized everything. We were the officer of the day in the Black Panther Party office, which was on 122nd Street and 7th Avenue, right here in Harlem. The Harlem branch of the Black Panther Party was one of the most revolutionary groups of people and revolutionary women. And I'm gonna tell you what the women did. The women insisted that when an older woman was seen walking down the street with her groceries, that the brothers go and carry those groceries up to the 6th floor. And we would get a pot of food for our office. The Black Panther Party office got a whole bunch of pots of food because we ran a whole bunches of groceries up to the 6th floor. They did so many wonderful things, and I don't want to belabor this, but the Black Panther Party did so many wonderful things, like making sure that heroin was poured down the sewer. So any heroin that anybody was selling on the street, the person had two choices: join the Black Panther Party. I don't want to talk about the second choice. But what I do want to say is that their heroin got confiscated and poured down the sewer because we didn't want that heroin in Harlem. We did not want it in the Black community. So that's very, very important. The other important thing is around health, is that it was the Black Panther Party who initiated the struggle with the National Institute of Health to begin studying sickle cell anemia. So, and it was the women in the Black Panther Party who did that training and who trained the brothers. You know, I just want to say that a lot of that training took place, some of it, in fact, took place in my apartment in the South Bronx, where I cooked dinner. We didn't have political education classes unless I cooked dinner for everybody that came to the classes. And I don't think that we have meetings in the Black community unless somebody has some cake, has some tea, has some cheese and wine. Sometimes you get some fried chicken and potato salad, but you're not going to have a meeting in our community without having food. And so since I've moved to Memphis, Tennessee, I've begun a program of just making sure that people have coffee and cake at meetings, or else I'm not coming to the meetings. But I do want to say this: I'm still working, and I want to leave this next question for these other sisters. It is such an honor for me to be here and to hear the work that you sisters are doing, and to let you know that we can still do a lot of stuff for free. So what you guys are doing can all be done for free. That was the goal of the Black Panther Party, to share all the resources. So I just want to leave that out there for you.
Thank you. So this is going to be our last question of the night, and then I hope some folks have some questions for these amazing women. And the last question is for all of you: how do you gauge success? What is the impact that you hope that your work has on the community, on individuals, but also perhaps more broadly?
So
The impact, and how you know that your work, how would you say that you want your work to be a success?
So, so the work of FoodLab Detroit and FoodLab Chicago is really the work of transforming a city, using food as a catalyst to do that. So I was on a panel, I'm gonna cheat a little bit, because I was on a panel maybe about 3 or 4 years ago. And the final question was, Devita, how do you know, how will you know that you've had impact? Or what does success look like for you? And here's the thing, for anybody that's in movement building work, or for anybody who is in long-term dismantling systemic or institutional racism, this is a life's work. And the first thing I had to do is I had to resolve myself that the work that I'm doing now and the impact that I may or may not have, I may not see it in my lifetime. This is ongoing work. But what success looks like for me in the immediate, in the now, something that I can witness, is very simple. And so I am not only a Generation Xer, but I am also a part of something that's called the sandwich generation. And if anybody's in the sandwich generation, you know what I'm talking about. The people in the sandwich generation are taking care of their young children and taking care of their aging elderly parents at the same time. I don't have any children, but my brother has a 5-year-old daughter. Her name is Aaliyah. And so everybody takes care of Aaliyah in my family because the world revolves around this 5-year-old. God bless you, parents and grandparents. I'm just the auntie that comes and goes. But I have the opportunity now at going on 53 to see sunset and sunrise. Sunset is my niece, 5 years old. The world is brand new to her. Sunset is my aging elderly mother and father who are dying. They're not dying today or tomorrow, hopefully, but they have more years behind them than they do ahead of them. And so they are in their sunset years. I have to say that I'm a daughter, granddaughter, great-granddaughter of ministers, so I see a lot of obituaries in my lifetime. So y'all get the sunset and sunrise. Stay with me, right? So I'm right there in the middle, auntie and daughter of my aging parents. And so when they asked me the question of what success looks like, is that I have to take what success looks like for me using my own personal experience of where I am in life. And I simply answered them like I'm going to answer you. Success for me looks like living in a city that loves its children and honors its elderly. When you love your children so much that you make sure that they have access to healthy, fresh, free, affordable food. That's when you love your children. When you honor and respect the elders, you make sure that they can die in dignity. That you don't have elderly people who are homeless, elderly people who are hungry, elderly people who have to make the decision of if I'm going to pay for my prescription or if I'm going to go to the grocery store. I want to live in a place, and I know that that place I've had impact when they understand the power of food to take care of their children and respect the elderly. That's what success looks like to me. I'm going to keep working toward that. I don't know if I'll see it in my lifetime, but it's the work that I'll continue to do.
I think, well, on this panel, and I know I spoke about this a lot too, but we talked about how food can be this ingredient that binds us together. Food can be something that gets people to show up. Food can be something that gets people to stick around. But what we didn't get to talk about yet was how, and so all of those to me say that food can be a tool that actually disarms people. But what we didn't talk about is how food is also a weapon and how it has been used as a weapon. And, you know, when I think about this country, for example, all of the food that we eat comes from stolen land. All of the food that we eat comes from exploited labor. And that is what the food system in this country was built upon. When we think about injustice, we a lot of times assume that there used to be justice. But in this country and in this world, 9 out of 10 times that is not the case, because the system was designed exactly how it was operating. And so success to me, and I think about, you know, the work that all of us have done is, and are doing, is we're not waiting on anyone else. We're not trusting the powers that be, because look at what the powers that be built. And a friend of mine all the time says that we all have tools and gifts that can help set people free. And so success and impact to me look like realized potential. So, you know, 2 years ago, I was sitting with my friends at my dinner table. And since then, with Fuel the People, we have fed almost 50,000 people. And that was just through the community that supported us. And it doesn't always look like showing up on the front lines and being the person with the megaphone. It doesn't always look like being at the protest. Every single person here in this room has a gift inside of them, has a resource, has a skill set that they can use to contribute to the movement, to uplift people, to liberate people, and to help other people realize their potential. And when I think about impact in the movement, I am so tired of the entire conversation being about Black death. Black people do so much more than die. We do so much more than die at the hands of police. And what we really have to talk about in the movement and add to the conversation is Black life, Black joy, Black love, and realizing and making sure that what we're doing in this movement is making sure that Black people get to realize their potential. So it's about finding what's within you to help other people do that. And that is what success looks like to me.
Thank you. I don't know what I did with my microphone. I did. Oh, okay. The question of success. For most people, success is defined by what you have. Success is defined by how rich you are, how large your home is, how many cars you have. And that is, in this country, how we define success. But in fact, that is not real success. These young women here are my success. They represent the success of the work that myself and many other people engaged in over the years. And I want to thank you for continuing that. I also want to say that the real success would be for every individual in this room to take up the issue of changing the society so that the resources in our society are distributed in a more just and equal way. And I think that if that would be all of our success. And probably this will not occur in my lifetime, but certainly that's what we should all be fighting for. Certainly that's what we all should be struggling to achieve. That's what we need. We need to get to change. I thought that in 1967, about in 5 years, we would have changed this. We would have had a revolution and this whole thing would have been done. And we would all be living in equal justice and equality. But in fact, that what I learned was that this struggle is a very protracted one, and that we have a responsibility to continue this struggle until we reach our goal, until we reach our success, because my success can only occur when you are successful.
Thank you, Cleo. I love that.
When the world is successful. Thank you.
So before we take questions, I just want to give another thank you to these amazing women, these amazing leaders. So inspirational. If anyone has questions, we have time for a few, so you could just kind of raise your hand and ask it loudly. I mean, I know they said it all, but, oh, we have one right there. Oh, we have one in the corner too. Ron? Oh, right here. We're bringing the microphone to you.
My question is directed to Cleo, and that is, could you talk about the results of the struggle of the Young Lords and the Black Panther Party around that sweet poison known as lead paint?
Yes, thank you, Ron. That's my husband, by the way, everybody. That's Ron Painter. He's amazing. Without Ron, there would be no Cleo at this point in my life, and that's very important. 30 years. And thank you for the question, honey. The sweet poison that Ron is speaking of is lead paint. And that in my first year of organizing in the South Bronx in 1966, I started to learn about this thick amounts of paint that were seen on the walls of tenement buildings in the South Bronx and in Harlem. And this thick paint was just based in lead. And it was sweet. Lead was sweet. And so little hungry children are hungry, they'll pick up anything. And when children are little and they're exploring, they're gonna pick up anything and put it in their mouths. And children, there was an epidemic of brain damage in the South Bronx and in Harlem. And as we come to find out, there was an epidemic all over the United States because everywhere in this country, lead was in the paint. And the struggle that Ron is talking about is our fight to end the use of lead-based paint in residences. And we were successful. It was a very successful struggle. It began with the Young Lords, and they took it to the city council, and the first legislation against the use of lead-based paint was here in New York City, led by the Young Lords Party, but initiated by the Black Panther Party and the Young Lords.
Thank you. Just one more amazing legacy of the Black Panther and Young Lords work that we so rarely hear about. Exactly. We have a hand right over here, please. Thank you. Or if you want to speak loudly. Yeah.
We just need it for the Zoom, so everybody can hear.
Hi, we talked a little bit about food being emblematic of identity, sovereignty, and agency, but I'm wondering, how does food represent love, specifically Black love, in our communities?
Great question, thanks.
That's the one I'm talking about.
That's exactly what they talk about.
Tap, tap, is this thing on? Okay. I think that food is a form of resistance and agency and dignity and all of those things, but it's also a form of compassion. And in and of itself, it is a love language. And at least that's how I feel it. That's how I experience it. You know, a week ago, I had an event and there was a DJ and she walked in and I was like, have you eaten? And she's like, oh no, I haven't. And I'm like, well, how are you gonna DJ if you haven't eaten? And my friend walked by and said, one thing about Allegra, she gonna feed people. And I think that one of the greatest forms of love is me showing my identity to you, right? So looping it back to identity, when I feel safe enough with you to show you who I am, to cook for you, to take you to my favorite restaurants, to stand on the front lines with you and hand you food. To me, that is one of the greatest forms of love that is in the Black community. And I see so much of that on the front lines. People are always feeding each other. People are always taking care of each other. People are, with food, nourishing each other. Protests are long and they are unpredictable, but we extend ourselves to one another on the front lines through food, and it allows us to continue to resist. And so that's how I think of it.
Yeah. Oh, mama's talking now, Allegra. Here you go.
My mom loves to come to things, like ask me questions that are really hard. So do not give her the microphone, please.
So I love this question. So if I may, I'm going to give you an example of the ultimate representation of food and love. And then what happens when that love chain is broken. So for me, I think that the ultimate example of food and love is something that's referred to as first food. And that's a baby's first food that comes from the mother's breast. I think breastfeeding a child is the ultimate form of not only bonding between a mother and a child, but love. And I say that because, you know, when my really, really good friend, her and her husband were preparing for their first child, I remember her saying to me, I'm preparing for my child, which means I am changing my entire diet so that my body can be not only ready to birth this child, but I'm changing my diet because I want my body to be ready to also feed this child too. Like that love, that connection between a mother and a child and the breastfeeding that occurs. And then I'm gonna tell you what happened when love is disrupted. So there was a study that was done, and what it did is it tracked a control group of Black women and white women, and it studied breastfeeding. And there was already statistics that show that Black women were not breastfeeding at the same rate as white women. But one of the control groups that was studied over a long amount of time, showed a significant drop-off of Black women who were breastfeeding. There was one control group that pretty much stayed the same, but then there was another group in which you saw it drop to a cliff. And people were wondering, well, what happened? Like, why did all of these Black women decide to stop breastfeeding? Did the love go away? Why did they just stop? Were they too busy working? Did they have to go to work? They couldn't pump? Like what happened? And so what studies tell us is that the main kind of motivator of breastfeeding is when your partner is at home, helping as well, or motivating you to breastfeed, because it becomes now a something that is done not only as a woman, but as a collective too, because the partner is involved, the father's involved. But what happened with this group of women who stopped breastfeeding altogether is mass incarceration. When a Black man goes to prison and that woman is in the household with her baby without the father of the child, something happens to her psyche. Not to say that she does not care for the child, but the breastfeeding drops all the way off. And so when we start talking about how important love is in the house, how important Black love is, not only between man and woman, but how important Black love and food is even to our children. That's the importance of love. And so I just wanted to give kind of that example in terms of, I think the ultimate example is love is the transferring of food from a mother to a child, and what can happen to a child, to a baby, when that Black love is disrupted in the household due to the criminal justice system. Miss Cleo, really, what keeps happening to your mic? Oh, yeah, okay, that's right, Margaret. I'm like, it's an audience, that's right, because you are the mother and you just gave your mic.
Always. The relationship between food and love. Well, let me just do a couple of things. And I want to carry forward a little bit about trust and food. Food is a reflection of trust between people. Because I'm not coming to your house and eating your food. And I was taught that from a very early age. Do not eat everybody's food. So it is a reflection of trust and love and support, because my memory of food is that we had the biggest garden in town where I grew up. And everybody just came over to our garden and was trusted to take what they needed out of our garden and put it on their tables. And my grandmother was the most loving woman, and she sometimes would put more in the garden than we ever needed to make sure that people in the community had enough food to eat. because everybody didn't have enough money to have enough food to eat. So I connect. Oh, and the other important thing is that between my two grandmothers, what I remember is that they used to compete over who could give me the biggest piece of cake. So I knew that they loved me terribly because they would actually, in front of me, compete over who was going to give me the biggest piece of cake. But in truth, I think that what love has to do with food is that we all need each other, and we all need food, and we all need love. And that's the bottom line, I think. I think that's where we are.
Can I just add one thing? I think also, even with loving each other and loving people, Black people, we have a huge legacy of farming. And, Devita, you spoke about all of the farms that are popping up not popping up, that are intentionally being built and cultivated within Detroit. And you just spoke about, your grandmother's farm. And when you grow food, you also have to love this earth. When you put your hands in the soil, you have to love what you're growing in order to produce it. And I think, that's a legacy that has been erased and taken from us, but it's a legacy that we are reclaiming. And I think that that definitely relates to Black people and how we love each other, but also how we love the planet that we live on as well.
I have one last thing to say. And that is that I would be remiss if I did not say the name of the Padre Plaza Success Gardens in the South Bronx.
That's right.
That is one of the gardens that I was responsible for helping to initiate and grow in at this time, and 5 more just like that in the South Bronx. And hopefully the some of the Harlem gardens will include me in their history as well. So thank you.
I just wanted to say this last thing about love in food. It's not necessarily Black love, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention this either, if my daddy and my mother are watching this and I didn't bring this up. When we talk about love and food. And that is, I was taught as a child a Bible verse. And that verse was, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, and that whosoever believe in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life." Look at Black folks in the room knowing the Bible verse. We all know it, right? And the way that I was raised, every first Sunday, we take communion. And the body of Christ is what? Bread. The blood of Christ is grape juice. But Welch's, child, we didn't have no wine. We had grape juice. But it was just the wine. So I was born and raised in terms of food and love, specifically through the body of Christ. And so I just had to bring that up. So
Go ahead.
my daddy
Go ahead, girl.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you so much. We'll all be around if anyone wants to come say hello. And thank you to our amazing panelists.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you. Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, so much.
I thought that was a beautiful note to end on. And I'm personally Jewish, but the first time I saw Devita speak, I was like, oh, this is church. Now I get it. So thank you once again for taking us to church, Devita. And Cleo, thank you for coming all the way to Memphis and honoring us with your words. Allegra, your work is so inspiring. Suzanne, your book is incredible. Thank you all so much for energizing this space for the first time, for the first program in this space. So thank you. Thank you all so much for being a part of tonight. Please stick around a little bit longer. Suzanne, again, is available for signing her book, so you can read more about Cleo, learn about her, and oh, I know. We have more programs after this one. We have one a week from tonight. The in-person tickets might have already sold out. I'm not totally sure. It's with Dr. Harris, Dr. Jessica Harris, who of course is the lead curator of our exhibition, and Steven Satterfeld, who you probably saw him on High on the Hog on Netflix and know him from Whetstone. We'll be here in conversation talking about Dr. Harris's seminal work, High on the Hog. We have a virtual option as well. And then keep checking the calendar. We'll have programs through June. So I hope you come back and join us. Thank you so much.